Terrific. So welcome to the eLearning Network Project Management course. My name is Magic. You can reach me at magic@elearning.net anytime. I'm always happy to chat about projects and to give you guys any kind of free consultations and advice. If you just have a couple of quick questions or just want some guidance, I'm always there for you. We also are happy to provide more services for you if you need to have actually engage us on an official basis. We can always get you a scope of work and help you with anything that you might need. So again, that's magic@elearning.net, and our toll-free number's up there. If you call that number and ask for Magic, they'll put you through to me. So the topics of today's training include the job roles that go into an e-learning project, then also the cost and time drivers that will affect your project. One of those big drivers is the source content completeness, so we'll actually define how we talk about source content and how that affects the project. We'll also look at what I call the magic matrix, which is a way to estimate work effort. Then discuss the production cycle, the e-learning development levels, and then come up with how do you estimate the amount of hours you might need and the kind of budget that you might need. The budget will flow from the hours, and so if you look at how many hours of labor that you require for a given project, then depending on whether you have regular full-time employees or whether you're outsourcing some of this work to some of your vendors, you can just take the total hours by whatever those costs are, and you'll arrive at a budget. Okay, so let's start off with the typical e-learning production job roles. There's a project sponsor. That's either a client, if you're an external vendor, or it may be the boss who's overseeing and who has approved a project and who ultimately will sign off on it, or be the person who is going to be controlling the budget or things that might be outside of your control. There's a subject matter expert. That's whoever is within your organization or whoever is on the project who's the most knowledgeable and who's responsible for gathering the content and putting it together for handoff to the e-learning development team. There's the e-learning production manager, which probably many of you guys on this call are today, people who are responsible for making sure that the projects are done on time and on budget, and that everybody's assigned the proper work and all the resources are allocated and so on. So typical project manager. There's the instructional designer or content writer. That's the person who is going to list out the learning objectives, maybe create an outline in PowerPoint or something or in Word, match those learning objectives to your corporate or business objectives, and maybe write the narrative. Maybe work with the subject matter expert who will give them their expertise and the core raw knowledge, and then they'll write this in an e-learning narrative that's user-friendly and that a voiceover talent or you could read through and record and add to the e-learning. The graphic artists, multimedia developers, those are the folks who can give your course a really beautiful look and feel. If you have folks working on your projects who are not, trained graphic artists, it may look kind of PowerPointy or clip artish, but if you have graphic artists or multimedia developers working on your project, the quality of the visuals is upgraded accordingly. So you may work with people like that on your project. Of course, you have an audio narrator. Sometimes that's a professional voice talent, and sometimes that is a sound, just you, with a USB microphone. But that's somebody, that job role is going to need to be done if you're going to have audio in your course. Then you have the e-learning programmer. That person is going to take the audio and the graphics and all the instructions and assemble it and make it work in an e-learning course. Often they'll be using tools like Captivate or Storyline or Lectora or Camtasia, maybe just doing a go-to training like this that I'm doing. I mean, whatever the actual final output is going to be, we call that person an e-learning programmer or e-learning developer. And then finally, you have a QC editor reviewer who will watch the media, review through it, and make sure that it conforms to any storyboard that you might have, or looks at this before you cycle back up to your project sponsor here to review and approve the course. So these are the core job roles. And when you're looking at putting together your project, you should know that this does not necessarily mean that these are all individual, separate people. Your subject matter expert may also be your instructional designer. Your e-learning programmer may also be your graphic artist and your voice talent. So these are just job roles and tasks that need to be performed in a typical e-learning production cycle. Not necessarily you're going to use all these people in your project. At the eLearning Network, the way that we work is we do break these roles down into separate professionals. So we have graphic artists that all they do is graphic artwork at a high level and very detailed professional work. Professional voice talents, all they do is record in their studio the high level quality audio. So by distributing this work amongst individuals who are experts at each of these particular things, the quality of the work is raised. So if you're not already working in this type of fashion in your environment, highly recommend it. It's difficult to have any like one professional who can do all of these things at a high level and quickly, so that you can deliver high quality, low cost, quickly. It's difficult for one person to hit all those three things at a high level. So that's why we break it down into multiple areas like this. Any questions about the e-learning production job roles before I move on, or does anybody have any other kinds of different roles besides what I've just mentioned? Nope. Okay, terrific. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. Um, So cost and time drivers that are usually beyond your control. These are the big four that I always like to review with any client or project sponsor. These are things that I don't dictate, but that are handed to me when I take on a project. The first is the quantity. So what is the total size of what you're asking to have built? There's a difference between a 5-minute training vignette and an hour-long multimedia level 4 interactive branching course. There's different levels of quantity. So when we talk about quantity, there's perhaps the number of screens. Are you taking a 5-screen PowerPoint and converting it into e-learning? Or do you have, a 60-screen, 45-minute project? So what's the quantity of what you're wanting to build here? Also, there's a total audio runtime. So that affects the cost of the project, because if you're using a professional voice talent, for one, they usually charge by the finished minute. And so if you have a 30-minute course versus a 5-minute or a 120-minute course, that'll affect the cost. It also determines potentially how many different animations and synchronization trigger points you're going to need. If you're bringing in bullets and pictures and fading in and out activities with audio narration, the volume of audio runtime that you have may affect how much of time is needed to get the course to sort of roll along and have a nice flow to it. And one of the ways that you can determine the total runtime is by looking at a script. So we highly recommend you write your scripts for your voice talents, and before you record them, you get those signed off, and that's going to be your course. If you take the word count of the script and divide it by 150 words per minute, you can come up with a pretty close runtime of your course. So if you have a 3,000 word count document, it's probably going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 minutes, because 20 times 150 is 3,000. So that's how you could figure out the quantity and estimate that. You also want to, if you have a scope of work that you're working on, or let's say your project sponsor says, okay, I need a 30-minute course done, and you have 4 weeks to do it. And then you say, great. And then you get with your subject matter expert, you meet with your sponsor, you get all this content, and they say, yes, I love the instructional design. This is everything I want to say. It's all ready to go. Before you start your media, you do a word count, and you find out, it's 90 minutes long. Well, that's 3 times longer than what your sponsor approved. And if they're not aware, they may still be under the impression that they've asked you to make a 30-minute course, but now they've actually asked you to triple the size of it. So that may impact your total budget that you need and your total time. So you want to estimate these things and make sure you update your sponsor with actual runtime before you continue on. So quantity is a big deal. Next, we have the complexity level. There's the so is the course going to be a rapid e-learning where you're just using something like a PowerPoint converter, recording your audio over some clip art, some bullets, and knocking it out super fast? We would call that a level 0, where just one person can come in, knock it out, basic PowerPoint knowledge, and there you go, there's your course. Level 4, on the other hand, on the total other opposite end of the spectrum, may be multi-branching scenarios with 3D, custom 3D models and animations and videos and so on, and the top shelf commercial grade e-learning. You really want to understand what level of learning are you going to be creating before you dive head in and sign your scope of work and get going on your projects. I do actually have something I'll share with you here on demos. If you go to eLearning.net and click on demos, here we have a nice little interactive demo that walks through the differences between a level 0 and a level 4. So if you're not quite sure the differences between levels, this is a pretty good overview of what you could expect. So another driver that affects your project that again may be beyond your control is the level of source content that you receive to get started with. So when you're looking at the project time and budget, you need to figure out how much time you're going to need to get your storyboard or your scripts written to get the underlying what you're going to say formatted before you start creating your e-learning courses. So the completeness and accuracy of the source content, we look at it as either none. You have no content at all, so you have to research and find all this content and do the instructional design process. It's raw, so somebody maybe hands you a PowerPoint that says these are the things I want to cover, but I really have nothing in the notes section. There's design ready, which is maybe some rough draft on each slide. You have some notes, some speaker notes. You have everything conceptually is in there, but it is not yet ready to for prime time. You have to write your scripts and do some lower level effort to get it ready. And then there's what we call development ready, which is a full-on storyboard that has everything you need, all the narrations ready to go. All you have to do is multimedia development, and that's it. So depending on the level of source content you have, you'll need to budget additional time or not for that process. Then the fourth big one, again, that may be beyond your control, is how many people are going to review and sign off on the work that's being performed. We have on one end of the spectrum, we have clients that give us pretty good level of source content, and they just almost rubber stamp everything comes out of our shop because they just love it. They just perfect for them, and they just have never questions or edits or anything. On the other side, we have a client that has actually a consortium of people that are all in it together, paying us out of one fund, but there's multiple companies that are involved in it, and so they all have to review everything and talk and communicate back and forth. And one group might ask us to change something, and the other group might ask us to change something else and undo a change that somebody else asked for. So there's multiple iterations and multiple review cycles because they're extremely particular in what they want and not particularly good at communicating that on the front end. So you need to account for the level of QC back and forth that's going to go on. That'll mostly affect the time, but as the projects drag on and as you have to repeatedly go into these files, and maybe if you're working with an outsourced vendor, the more you keep going back to them to say change this, change that, the more they may start to say, okay, this is out of scope, or you've gone over your number of allocated changes and so on. So you want to make sure that you're aware that these costs and drivers do affect your project, that they're usually beyond your control. So you want to have this conversation like I'm having with you now with whoever controls these things so that they are aware that these things impact the project and that you're counting on them to be cognizant of these things. Because if ever they give you a quantity or complexity level request that's beyond what you've agreed to at the beginning, you can go back and say, remember we talked about this. And so this is how, as a project manager, part of project management is setting expectations and delivering to those expectations. So this is the setting part that I'm talking about. So before I move on, any questions or comments from the group? Any stories or anecdotes you want to share? Okay, I don't see any, and I think no chats, questions in the chat section here, so I'm going to move on. But again, for the group here, if you want to raise a question, you can feel free to type it in the little chat window here, and I'll be happy to address those. Okay. So we talked about the source completeness. I guess I forgot I had a slide on this. Again, the source content completeness, so I won't go over this too much. But feel free, if you want to grab a screenshot of this, you feel free to do so. Also, I'll be posting this video online so you can read through it again. But the source content completeness is critical because we usually look at splitting e-learning projects into two major phases. There's what we call the storyboarding and instructional design phase, and then there's the multimedia development phase. So, and it's almost fully 50% effort on both sides. So if it takes 4 weeks to get your source content in order and ready to go, it's probably going to take 4 weeks to get the multimedia produced as well. It's it's pretty close to a 50-50 proposition. The more complete and dedicated and high quality work you do on the front end, getting your storyboards and your um, instructional design process nailed down, the less rework there is on the multimedia development side. So that means that if your source content is, um, let's say, if the source content that's created for you is, let me see, I'm going to mute this person here. Here we go. Hi, Patrick, welcome. I'm just going to put you on mute so we don't hear any background noise there. If your source content comes in like design ready, then half of your job is already done for you. So you can reduce your project time and budget accordingly. Okay. Let's just quickly talk about this magic matrix, the e-learning development worksheet. So when it comes to how much time you're going to need for each of these different development phases of e-learning, we have this little chart. I'm going to throw this into our training window here. So there's a link in the GoToMeeting chat box here. And if you want to jump to this link, you feel free to do so. You could bookmark this. So when you're going to start a project, when you're setting up how much time you're going to need in terms of hours or weeks, you want to know how much work effort is required across these different functions. So when it comes to instructional design, are you going to have, and this is per 30 minutes of finished e-learning. For a half an hour course, if you have nothing to work with to begin with from instructional design, you're probably going to want to allocate about 20 hours plus or minus to come up with your course outline, your learning objectives, your quizzes, how you're going to measure whether or not the e-learning was effective or not, and so on. And if you already have done that, somebody's already done this work, they're handing you some PowerPoints or some courses you've already been working on as instructor-led courses, and you're just converting those to e-learning, you might have a moderate level of instructional design. And if you're receiving a full-on storyboard that's already fully sequenced and everything's good to go, you may have very limited amount of instructional design that's needed. Same with content writing. If you have your scripts already produced and ready to go, it may be low level of effort or just some, but if you haven't, we have really no finished ready for production scripts, it may be a high level of writing that's going to need to go in here. And the amount of effort, not only is it high based on the state of the content, whether you have no content or some, it's also dependent upon the level, which we'll talk about here in a moment, of e-learning complexity that you're doing. Because writing a narrative for multiple characters that are performing these scenarios, and what would you do next if the sales person says X and the customer responds Y, how would you handle this situation? Writing that kind of e-learning is very different than straight up compliance training. You must do this, you must not do that, click next. So this work effort here, high, moderate, or low, it's a good way to sort of communicate to non-e-learning developers who you might need to work with to approve your budgets and so on, that, oh, this is going to need a lot of work, or oh, this is not going to need that much work for this area. So feel free to browse this article at your convenience. There's the complexity of visual design. Do you want like a low-level graphics, or do you want some high custom graphics that are maybe custom charts or 2D illustrations or character illustrations that are all custom that take time? How complex and how much time do you need to perform all of these tasks? So again, feel free to review this job aid at your convenience, the Magic Matrix. Again, I posted it to the chat window here. Okay. So the typical e-learning production cycle, those of you who are using something like Microsoft Project or Open Project, the open source project management system, or some online tool, normally the major milestones that go into the e-learning production cycle include the instructional design phase. Again, you're writing your learning objectives and coming up with your course plan. You gather your content and you do what we call, you create a content map and gap. So what we like to do there is have a document that lists the learning objectives in a column, and then in another column next to that would be referencing where the source content is. Either copy and paste the source content right in there, the text that you might want to create and use as a source for your narration, or you might reference a Word document, say see page 5 through 9 of handbook XYZ, or maybe see slides 3 through 4 on this PowerPoint, whatever. It's a map that says this learning objective, you can find the content over here. And if it's blank, that means you have a gap and you need to work with your subject matter expert to fill in the gaps of where you have a learning objective but you don't have any source content. So that's the content gathering and development phase, is working with any existing materials you may have, work with a SME interview to get anything that you don't have already, do the creative writing process, write up a storyboard, which you highly recommend. Everybody use a storyboard when you're creating e-learning, and any instructions for your graphic artists and so on. The graphic design artwork then, once you have your storyboard ready to go and your graphic art instructions, the graphic design and artwork can begin. Now, you're probably familiar with the old phrase saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, if you already have your storyboard written, then it's easier for the graphic artist to see the words you want to say and make a picture that reflects that. There's this interplay that goes between the storyboard narration and the graphic design that's critical, where they have to match up. And you may find it sometimes that after you have your storyboard written, the graphic artist does a great job conceptualizing and visualizing what you're trying to say, and they may lay out a different visual approach to the content, and you may want to go back and rework your storyboard. So about this production cycle, you want to give yourself enough time to write your storyboards, come up with your overviews, work with your graphic artists, but then have a little bit of padding in there so that if the graphic design can often lead to inspiration, then it means rewriting the storyboard before you produce your multimedia e-learning. So give yourself a little bit of time for the artists to work with your instructional designers to really come up with the best product that they can. So once everything's though done, your storyboard is done, your graphic mock-ups are ready to go, it's all ready to be put together and assembled in an e-learning authoring tool, again like Captivate or Storyline or Lectora. You're going to hand all of the graphics and audio files to an e-learning developer, and they're going to assemble them exactly the way the storyboard says. So once you hit that phase and once the multimedia is ready to be produced and programmed, maybe they're going to create interactivities and drag and drop, true false, hotspots, branching scenarios, whatnot. That's the e-learning programming part of the authoring process. And then you're also going to have a multimedia development, potentially, depending on the kind of work you're doing, that's going to be going on, a multimedia development phase. And that might be custom photography, photorealistic 3D artwork, video production, whatever goes beyond what a graphic artist might do or what an e-learning programmer can do. You may have a multimedia e-learning development phase in your production cycle. And these things can go on. E-learning authoring, programming, and multimedia development can be going on simultaneously. So again, if you have multiple people working on your project, the critical path can be sort of condensed by working on these 3 items concurrently. And so usually we recommend that you have an e-learning programmer who's doing your interactivities separate from the person who's actually just doing all the synchronization, the timing of assets, and so on, because it'll just go quicker that way. And you don't have to be an e-learning programmer knowing triggers and variables and other things in order to just make timing of bullets. So sometimes you can use a more entry-level e-learning production person to work on the authoring, and then just pair that person up with a programmer who can handle the heavy lifting on some of the more challenging parts of the project, and you don't slow anything down. And that's what we, again, here at the eLearning Network do, is we do this sort of hourly a la carte services. So if you ever needed somebody to handle e-learning graphic artwork or multimedia, and you want to handle on your side the instructional design and the e-learning authoring, we can set that up. Or again, you can just set that up in your own infrastructure, but that's just an example of how this can work. So and then there's the LMS course testing and deployment. You publish it and load it into your LMS and do the QC testing and making sure everything's ready to go. So these are the high-level milestones, the production cycles. Normally I'd give, well, we'll talk about time here in a second, but you could also allocate time to each of these, estimate the time that each of these should happen, and create your project plan accordingly. And then as you perform projects, you'll get a better feel for how long each of these sections take you. Alrighty, so we talked a little bit about e-learning development levels, the complexity of what we might have to be creating. Again, the complexity of what you're going to create has a big impact on the time and budget you're going to need. Again, if I go back to the website here, I believe it's under demos. Yep, there's an example of what these levels are. I think I'll actually just bring that up real quick to show you. Let me mute my stereo system here. So just to give you a quick example,
Level 0 is a very simplistic,
Level
rapidly
0
developed
is
e-learning
very
course.
minimal level of
A
graphic
very
design.
minimal level of graphic
Basic
design is
on-screen
applied,
text
which
and
means
bullet
that the
lists with
screens
some stock
primarily
imagery.
consist of on-screen
No
text,
real complex
bulleted
knowledge
lists,
checks
and
or
a limited
interactivities.
amount of
It may
stock
have a
imagery.
quiz or something.
Level 0
And
does not
voiceover
contain a knowledge
may or may not
check
be
quiz
included.
or
If it's
any
included,
user
it's probably going to be a
interactivities.
USB
They
microphone
are paced
headset.
at the user's
May use
speed
a
because
professional
there is
voice
no
talent,
audio
but typically
included,
level 0
which
is
also
just rapid
results in
e-learning
very
where
little
one person just
animation.
knocks it out for
Let's
you.
take a look at a standard
So
Level
here's an
0
example of
title
a simple
screen will
split
consist of
screen.
the
Nice
company's
looking
name or
course, but
logo,
pretty
as
simple,
well as the course title
cover
and subtitle.
slide for a
As you
screen.
can see, the
You could
design
use
is
this as a
minimal, featuring only
template
a
as well. I
textured
mean, we have
background and
templates.
color
This
block
actually came
design
from one of our
approach.
templates. So
Click Next
if you're not
to
a graphic
navigate
artist
through
and you're
each
a one-man
screen.
band doing this sort of thing, starting with a template is a great way to have a nice looking course quickly and easily without having to be an artist. Here's a simple example of one stock photography with some bullet points and a little heading up here. So it looks nice, but nothing overly complicated. So that's the typical
While a Level 1 template
level
and back
0. Level 1 gets a little fancier in terms of some of the design aesthetic that you have here. There's a little drop shadow here, some different offset headers. You may have a split screen visual. We have the visual here, title here with a different color block, and so that you could see that an artist has applied a little bit of a soft treatment to this to raise the level of the complexity.
Click on each thumbnail to view more examples of Level 1 courses.
Icons and work that's done.
Level 2 is our most
Level
commonly
2,
produced course and includes standard graphic design. Here's an example of a Level 2 title slide, which displays an enhanced graphic design by way of custom imagery and text treatment. As you see here, our library of stock illustrations are incorporated into a custom icon style designed specifically for the course.
Maybe you have those same kind of icons then that represent different sections of your course, so it starts to get a little more complex visually. I mean, there's some thought that needs to go into this, and when we're going to talk about the tools for growth, we're going to have a chart like this and we're going to revisit this icon. When it comes to lending, we're going to have like a dollar theme. Performance has these gears, and so it takes a little bit of time, extra time and effort and talent to come up with this kind of a visual approach. And there's some more examples you can check out at your convenience. This is a drag and drop activity.
Click on each thumbnail to view more examples of Level 2 courses.
We would consider a Level 2 design.
Level 3 includes everything that was demonstrated in Level 2, but offers superior graphic design, as well as custom menu programming and navigation, allowing for a more interactive user experience.
It requires more
Here's a quick
work still
sample.
by a programmer
This Level 3,
artist,
as you can see here, the quality of design is far beyond that of the previous levels and completely customized to the theme of the course.
Covering some OSHA concepts.
This Level 3 course features a custom menu that the user can use to navigate to each lesson. The custom imagery and enhanced template greatly increase visual
this
stimulation.
also has a little more advanced interactivity where you can jump in the course to some special section of the course, so there's some programming that goes in. So a Level 3 is going to have more complex and interesting looking layouts,
Level 3
more
also
kinds of
includes an
interactivity
illustrated
that's more
character from our
custom than what
character
you would normally
library
see in
with
a
a
course.
wardrobe that is
Maybe a
customized
custom
to fit your
illustration
company
of a
or
character
industry.
here.
This character can serve as the course guide
so
or just click on each thumbnail to view more examples of Level 3 courses.
That you can click on these and see, some more examples at your convenience. And then a Level 4.
A Level 4 this is an example of a custom menu that lets the user choose which environment they would like to explore. Each room contains appropriate content and interactions. Take a moment to explore the menu and then click Next to continue.
When you click on each of these items, you change where you're going to jump, and then when you click on this section, you jump to that part of the course. So this starts to get into more complex branching, and these are all photorealistic looking 3D objects that are in here. So this may look like a real place, but this is actually done all in 3D modeling, as is this graphic here, as is everything you'll see in the remaining of this little presentation here. So here there's a photograph, a custom photograph of a model that was done here in Seattle. You see we shot her in a studio and we dropped her into a 3D environment. So all this kind of thing is possible, but it just costs more in terms of time and effort to make a Level 4. So if you're and there's some more examples in here. So when we talk about e-learning development levels, Level 0 through 4, Feel free to grab a screenshot of this if you like, and again, you can visit our demos gallery to walk through that other example. You want to set the stage for your sponsors. What level do you want? Are you expecting a level 0 or are you expecting a level 3? Because they're going to have different implications in terms of time and budget that you're going to need. It's very difficult to do a level 4 course on a level 0 budget or time. So just make sure that everybody's aware of what you're talking about. So here we have, and let me just check, make sure I don't have any questions in the chat window. Looks like no, so I'm going to just keep on going. And because you don't have any questions, we're going to wrap this up pretty early, I think. Normally I allow for a full hour for this course, but we'll probably be done early, and I'll open it for questions at the end. And if you have any questions specific to your projects or your environment, feel free to schedule a time offline with me anytime. I'd be happy to tell you what I think it would take in terms of time and effort, and help coach you in terms of what you want to talk to your sponsors in terms of getting the resources that you need to produce your projects. So this is a very sort of broad brush, high level overview of what these levels might take in terms of time for a 30-minute course. So if you were a one-man band again and you're going to just knock out a course, a 30-minute course, the minimum amount of time you're probably going to want is an hour per minute of content to write the storyboard, get it approved, create your PowerPoint or whatever storyline file, whatever you're going to use as your initial design product, get the narration sort of written down and to record it, synchronize everything, find your graphics and so on. I'd say 30 hours is reasonable. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less, depends on if you're outsourcing this to someone. So if you're a buyer and you're working with somebody to produce your e-learning for you, you shouldn't be seeing for a 30-minute simple rapid e-learning course a bill or time that reflects 100 hours or more for a 30-minute course typically. So then when you go to a level 1, we're looking at maybe 70 hours or so, and instead of having one person working 30 hours, you're probably going to need a graphic artist for 10 hours. Because it's a little more complex, the e-learning developer is going to need a few more hours, and then you maybe have a project manager who's making sure that everything is getting done properly, and so have some time for them. This time maybe not exactly, but it's pretty close in terms of what I think is reasonable. Level 2 is maybe 140 hours, about double, because now you're talking about more custom illustrations, custom graphics. You maybe have some custom interactivities, so now you bring a programmer in here, and your graphic artist is going to be spending more time than they otherwise would because they're doing more polishing of the course, and a little more time for the production manager. So the production manager just goes up 25%, but the graphic artist is doubling their time. And then about a 50% increase for the e-learning developer, and 25 hours for the programmer. When you get to a level 3, that's where we had some custom navigation, maybe some more complex interactivities. The e-learning programmer time goes up significantly, but the e-learning developer doesn't go up so much because most of the time is going up on these other professionals, and all this person has to do is just make sure that they're incorporating these items properly when they receive them. And the e-learning developer is responsible for the final product, but they're not a one-man band anymore. They're relying upon these other people. So that's why their time doesn't go up that much. Then as an e-learning level 4 comes on, there's a lot of extra time going into programming. There's extra multimedia development time. So we would normally expect a little bit of time to actually drop for the e-learning developer now, because some of the things they would normally be responsible for here are actually been handed off to other people now, and they're more a custodian of the file and making sure the quality is good and so on. But that's why this chart is the way that it is, and you might give yourself about 400 hours of labor of hours, up to 400 hours for like a high level complex level 4 course. So I think, and I have the weeks in here, so the weeks is critical. You want to give yourself probably for 30 hours, give yourself 2 weeks. That will give you time to get the approvals and make any edits and so on, so that you don't always have just 1 week to get it done and it has to go into production immediately as soon as it's done. If you're working in a high pressure environment, you always want to, it's easier to ask for more time at the front than halfway through a project. So I'd say normally 30 minutes of a level 0, 1 to 2 weeks, error on the side of 2 weeks level 1 3 weeks, level 2 6 weeks, level 3 8 weeks, and then level 4 give yourself 8 or 8+ weeks, because the more complex it is, the more challenging it is to do the QC review and so on. But there's no real reason why, like a level 2 course, for example, should take 6 months to create. We have seen that happen when we've been working on projects where our client is, like, again, multiple reviews, multiple decision makers, really slow to respond. They're not in a hurry, so sometimes projects can drag on seemingly forever. But normally, I think these weeks are pretty good ballpark estimates, and that's, at least this is what we see. So that's it for the presentation.